Welcome to our continuing series on Donald Trump's resolve to undermine freedom of the press, a major pillar of American democracy. I'm Bertram de Souza, host of the Scribbler podcast and a veteran journalist in the Mahoning Valley. I worked for the now closed Youngstown Vindicator for 40 years. My co-host today is Cynthia Ricker, also a veteran journalist who was at the Vindicator for 41 years. When ABC News succumbed to Trump in his lawsuit against the network's leading journalist, George Stephanopoulos, the message was clear. There's no stopping the dictator-in-chief who was sworn in for a second term on January 20th in his war against the legitimate press. Emboldened by his victory over ABC, the titular head of the Republican Party made good on his promise to sue the Des Moines Register and its pollster, and also 60 Minutes, the CBS News Sunday magazine. Given that these lawsuits are the opening salvo by Trump against the legacy press, is he on solid ground, or is he simply bullying newspapers and television stations into muting their criticism of him? We'll ask our guest today, David Marburger of Cleveland in Arizona, a leading veteran media lawyer in the country. David joined us recently to discuss the challenges facing a free, unfettered press in a Trump administration. Well, nice to see you again, David. And thanks for giving us the time to talk about the lawsuits that Donald Trump has filed and undoubtedly will file against legacy media, what I call the legitimate press. So let me start by asking you to define two legal concepts, libel and slander.
Well, they're pretty similar. Libel is where in writing, the writer says something about someone else that disparages that person's character.
Mm-hmm.
And slander is the same thing, only it's spoken instead of written.
Right. And how do you prove those?
Libel is when, we'll say, a speaker in writing makes a statement of fact, an informational statement about some other person. And that statement disparages that other person's character. That statement is false. And that other person experiences some kind of injury by virtue of that statement. And the speaker is at fault for the fact that the informational statement is false. So the speaker is publishing a writing about a third person that's informational rather than an opinion. The information is not true. And the fact that the information is false is the fault of the publisher. And then the person who's the subject of the communication, of the publication, has been harmed. It can show injury. Injury to reputation is core, but injury can also include mental distress.
Does it only go to an individual? Can it also be a corporation or company? Does it have to be a person?
You mean the person who claims to be hurt?
Yes.
Can be a corporation, can be a company, yes.
Okay.
And so there also has to be a disregard for the truth, right?
Well, it depends on who claims to be hurt.
Right.
If it's Joe or Josephine Bag of Donuts, they don't necessarily have to show reckless disregard for the truth. They could show just a failure to be careful. The publisher wasn't sufficiently careful to ascertain the truth versus the falsehood. Right. But if the person claiming to be hurt is a high-ranking government official or a famous person called a public figure, they have to show not only that there was falsehood, but the publisher published the falsehood while entertaining actual doubt, serious doubt about whether the informational statement was true or false.
And David,
doubt about the truth. They have to be like highly aware that the statement is almost certainly false. So you have to have a strong suspicion that what you're saying is false. That's what reckless disregard for the truth is.
Right.
And you're talking about the publisher, but it also goes to the writer, right? So it could be the writer and the publisher.
Yeah, well, I think of the writer as being the publisher.
Okay.
When I say publisher, it's the person who causes the communication to be distributed to other people.
Okay, but in some of the cases that we dealt with at the Vindicator, the reporter and possibly the editor and the company, the paper, were charged in some of those cases. So
Right.
in that case, it could be it would definitely be the publisher since they published it, but the reporter could also be, or the writer could also be.
Sure, because they're facilitating the publication by writing the piece,
Okay,
So libel,
knowing that it's going to be circulated.
right.
so libel is written and slander is spoken, right? And the reason I bring this up is, and we're going to be discussing the lawsuit against Trump's lawsuit against ABC, George Stephanopoulos, which was settled, a lawsuit against the Des Moines Register and its pollster that Trump claimed, purposely, sort of played around with the poll numbers, and then the lawsuit against 60 Minutes, where there seems to be some negotiations to try and reach a settlement. But the reason I brought up slander as well is that according to Congressman Robert Garcia from California, he has received a letter, and other members of Congress have received, Democratic members of Congress have received letters from a top Department of Justice prosecutor in Washington, D.C., who has sort of challenged them or warned them about their criticism of Donald Trump and also Elon Musk. And so what Congressman Garcia has written in response to receiving this letter says that, so if you criticize Elon Musk, Trump's DOJ will send you this letter. Members of Congress must have the right to forcefully oppose the Trump administration. I will not be silenced. And the letter made reference to an interview with CNN that Garcia was involved in, and where he criticized Elon Musk quite strenuously. And so now these members of Congress who are critical of the Trump administration are receiving these letters from the Department of Justice. Respond to that. As somebody who has been involved in the media from a lawyer's point of view for so long.
That's beyond outrageous. It makes me sick. It's highly disturbing. But the reason it's disturbing, there are a lot of reasons.
But please,
but
go
perhaps
ahead.
The most potent of the reasons is that it's the Department of Justice which prosecutes crimes. And what it reminds me of is the Sedition Act of 1798, which was enacted during John Adams' administration, our second president. And under that act, Congress made it a crime to falsely accuse people in government or criticize people in government if it was false and malicious. You could go to jail. And I think that some newspaper editors were jailed under the Sedition Act of 1798. And when Thomas Jefferson became president after John Adams was finished, he pardoned everybody who was convicted under the Sedition Act. And he said that he considered the act to be a nullity. I think here's what his words were. I happen to have it by coincidence. And it is coincidence. I happen to have it. Jefferson said he considered that Sedition Act to be, quote, a nullity, as absolute and as palpable as if Congress had ordered us to fall down and worship a golden image. In fact, no court of last resort in our country has ever held or suggested that you could be prosecuted for libel because you criticized the government. In this case, it would be government officials, which technically, theoretically could still be done. But the hostility in our system since Thomas Jefferson became president in 1801, I believe it was, our system of government has been extremely hostile to libel suits when brought by high-ranking government officials when their official conduct is what's being criticized.
Yeah. Here's what, and you know, it shocked me that, but it shouldn't shock me because I think you've seen Donald Trump claiming to be a monarch, and then having that the fake Time magazine cover where where he posted an image of himself with a crown.
Yes, I saw it.
Yeah, and sort of there doesn't seem to be any guardrails. But here's what Edwin Martin, the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, has written to members of Congress, including Robert Garcia, a Democrat from California. He said to Garcia during a live interview with CNN, when asked how Democrats can stop Elon Musk, you spoke clearly, quote, what the American public wants is for us to bring actual weapons to this bar fight. This is an actual fight for democracy, close quotes, Martin wrote, adding that Garcia had until February 24th, 2025 to respond, quote, this sounds to some like a threat to Mr. Musk, an appointed representative of President Donald Trump, who you call a D and government staff who work for him. Their concerns have led to this inquiry. Have you ever come across anything like this?
Well, of course not. And like I said, we may not have come across anything like that since 1798 with the debunked Sedition Act that I described earlier. I am stunned by this, but not surprised. What I don't understand is what's the inquiry? What is it that the Department of Justice claims to be doing? Are they enforcing a criminal law? If so, which one is it?
Exactly.
Well, it sounds like they're suggesting that that he's threatening a government official, which I'm not even sure you can call Elon Musk that. And the hypocrisy of it is just stunning, based on what Trump said the entire way through every campaign that he has been conducting, and all of the threats that he's been making to everyone else. It's just mind-boggling that the DOJ would actually do this. My question to you is, you were talking about the courts. If this goes to court, I mean, there have been some of the federal judges have been stopping some of the actions that Trump is trying to take by executive order. How strong do you think the courts are going to hold up, and how long will they hold up? And if it makes it to the Supreme Court, are they going to uphold the law for the citizenry, or are they going to uphold the law for the guy who appointed the majority of them?
Well, I mean, I can't predict what the U.S. Supreme Court will do in any particular situation, and we don't even know what the situation would be. In other words, what is it that the federal government claims would be a crime in what that congressman said on CNN, calling Elon Musk a dick?
Yeah.
What is that crime? It's certainly not a threat against a government official. We do have a federal statute that bars threats to the lives or bodily safety of government officials. But most typically, that's been in the context of real threats, genuine expressions of intention to cause harm, intentions, I will kill you, I will get you. That's not what's going on here. And in fact, a lot of things that have been charged as threats under that act have been thrown out because in the context, it was obvious there was no genuine attempt to murder or maim the government official. When the government uses its awesome power, and it is awesome, it's awesome what the government can do. They can take away your property, take away your liberty, can take away your peace of mind. When the government uses that power to quell dissent, to quell critics, we're not in a self-governing society anymore.
Right. And so what has happened is Donald Trump's continuing attack on the legacy media, especially, is emboldening other public officials. And as you made reference to it just before we started, about this judge in Mississippi who went after an editorial that was published. Have you ever seen that and this was done without a hearing, according to the news story?
What was it? It was a a temporary restraining order. But what was extraordinary? A lot of things were extraordinary about it.
So explain that case and why that is so important.
It was only a few days old. I
Right.
think it was on the 19th of February that a trial level judge, a trial court judge in Clarksdale, Mississippi, issued a temporary restraining order requiring the local newspaper to remove from its website an editorial that criticized the government for not providing the newspaper notice of a special meeting, which under the open meetings law of Mississippi had to be done. That is, when the city council is going to have a special meeting, they have to notify the local press. The local press, in this case, the Clarksdale, I think it was called the Register, said it wasn't notified, and its editorial criticized the government for not providing that notice. So the government sued and got a temporary restraining order from a local judge to require this editorial to be removed from the website. Now, I can't imagine that that's ever happened before anywhere in the United States in the history of the United States. Now, obviously, pre-internet, you couldn't remove an editorial from a printed newspaper. But I have never heard anything like this.
And what was the outcome? Because I hadn't heard about this.
Well, it's a temporary restraining order. They typically last 10 days, and the 10 days aren't even up yet.
Right. And the thing, too, is, as you say, this was an editorial. It was opinion.
Yeah.
It was not a news story.
Well, it was a criticism, and it didn't imply criminal conduct.
Exactly.
It just said you didn't notify. You have a duty under the open meetings law to notify the press when you're going to have a special meeting. You didn't do it. And, you know, it disparaged that failure. And the city said, it was just a mistake by us. We notified others. We just mistakenly didn't notify you. So they go to court and they get a judge to require the editorial to be taken down from the website when there's no trial.
Yes.
There's no finding of liability, any kind of liability. Just they decided that this is unfair to us, take it down.
And there was a time, and we are aware of this because you've defended us and others at the Vindicator, what used to be the Vindicator for a long time, is public officials would get angry and upset with the editorials, and even with my columns or other local columnists. However, it was very rare when they would threaten a lawsuit because they knew how high that standard was that they would have to prove. And you know, you're very much aware of this. But it almost seems now that the press has become, it's open season for the press, especially among government officials. And that worries me tremendously.
Oh, it does me too. And they've taken their cue from Donald Trump and the GOP generally. What's called the GOP. I remember the GOP when it was more like George H.W. Bush.
Right.
But now the GOP is unrecognizable to me as the Republican Party. But nonetheless, they take their cues from Trump. And one of the things that worries me is that the judges might too.
That's what I was just going to ask you, because it seems like the courts have become so much more sympathetic than we ever dealt with. You know,
I agree with you.
They looked at the law, and now it seems like they are throwing it out the window.
And they take I have a little motto or slogan that I've thrown around for years when I talk to clients when they ask, you know, what are our chances in a lawsuit? Excuse me. And that is, computers don't decide cases, people do.
Right.
So if computers decided, let's take the ABC case, which we haven't talked about yet, but the Trump versus ABC. If a computer was deciding that case, it's slam dunk victory for ABC. Slam dunk victory for ABC, because if a computer was applying the law as it existed up until, you know, last December when they settled, a computer would say, sorry, Trump, you're done. And the computer would say that right at the beginning. You're done. You're done. You're not going to make it. But people decide cases, not computers. And there's enough leeway in the law, enough leeway in the English language, which comprises the law, that it's not difficult for a judge to essentially break with precedent and start finding liability in situations where liability was routinely and consistently never found.
And so let us talk about that ABC News lawsuit that Donald Trump filed against George Stephanopoulos, because it speaks exactly to what you're saying. First of all, and I know you've taken some time, thank you for looking at the suit and looking at the facts in it, but the fact that ABC News and its owner decided to settle sort of speaks exactly to what you were saying, David, which was the press defendants are now beginning to worry that if they go to trial, given the current environment, they could well lose even if there's no merit, because of the way judges are sort of looking at the law and what's going on. So let's speak to that ABC and whether if you were defending ABC, whether you would have sort of advised them to settle.
Well, I read a report in the New York Times that purported to be sort of an inside story of what ABC was considering when it decided to settle. And I can't say that those considerations are invalid. I cannot say that. What they are worried about, one of the things that the New York Times reported that the Disney executives were worried about was you had a judge who denied a motion to dismiss. That is, ABC moved to dismiss Trump's case,
mm-hmm.
and the federal judge in Miami, who was appointed by George W. Bush, had a 21-page opinion in which she sort of railed against George Stephanopoulos because he repeated several times that a jury had found Mr. Trump liable for rape
mm-hmm.
in the civil trial that was brought by E. Jean Carroll, the former magazine editor. If a computer were deciding, we should really explain to your viewers the background of this. E. Jean Carroll sues Trump for touching her without her consent in her groin area, and sues him for that and for defamation based on his comments about that. And she wins, I think, $5 million from a jury in New York in a civil case, not a criminal case.
Mm-hmm.
The New York statute that defines what was wrong about what Trump allegedly did apparently defines rape very narrowly, perhaps so narrowly that it would have to be penetration by the penis in the vagina. It might be that narrow.
Right.
And E. Jean Carroll, although she prevailed, what the finding was that Trump sexually abused her, but did not have the penetration that I just described.
Was it sexual abuse or assault?
I understood it was sexual abuse.
Okay.
But it could have been sexual assault. I'm not sure what the statutory term is in New York, but the idea was an unconsented, sexually related touching, even though there was no sexual intercourse. When Stephanopoulos was kind of reciting what happened in the case, he repeated several times that it was a civil finding of liability for rape. I have no problem with that. And the state of the law has no problem with that. It is a long held principle of libel law that journalists need not describe legal proceedings or legal findings in precise technical legal language, that they can use the popular sense of the acts. In other words, the popular sense of those acts would be rape.
Right.
Even the trial judge in the Carroll case said that that would be the popular sense, even though it wasn't technically a rape under the New York's narrowly drawn statute. And it reminds me of something that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, which includes Ohio, Michigan, Tennessee, Kentucky, it said in a case, and I'll quote to you from what it said because I thought it was exactly on the money. It said, like the readers for whom they write, few news reporters are lawyers. Yet they must often report under a short deadline complex accusations and arguments in colloquial language that the average reader can understand. Because of the public importance of reporting about cases of this kind, the law must allow leeway for misinterpretation and error of what the law requires. So you aren't writing a law review article. You're writing, George Stephanopoulos is not dictating a law review article. He is speaking to the average person who also isn't a lawyer, who doesn't know the meaning of precise legal terms. Right. Many of us, even lawyers, don't know the meanings of some precise legal terms because they might be in some statute that we've never read. But we all know the meaning of unconsented touching in the genitals by some, where a man without your consent, if you're a woman, touches you in the genitals. We all think that that is rape or akin to it. And that's why Stephanopoulos, if a computer was deciding the case, the computer would say, Stephanopoulos, you're not liable. However, a computer was not deciding the case. We had a judge who was a Florida judge, right, appointed by a Republican, who was very critical of George Stephanopoulos. Now, keep in mind, in Florida is not a good place for the mainstream press when they get sued. Remember what happened in 2016. Recall Hulk Hogan got a jury award of $140.1 million against Gawker in 2016 in Tampa, Florida. Florida is a dangerous place. And so the Disney executives undoubtedly gave that some thought. They're in Florida. They've got a hostile judge, a judge who has expressed hostility toward their case. And Florida has produced some pretty big bad verdicts in favor of people who sue the press.
Yeah.
So I can understand the decision to settle.
Cindy's going to bail for a little bit so she can plug in her computer. So based on this ABC lawsuit, which, Trump obviously claimed as a major victory, especially against George Stephanopoulos, Trump has also sued the Des Moines Register and its pollster, claiming that before the presidential election, the pollster somehow doctored the poll results to show that he wasn't doing as well and that Kamala Harris was doing much better than she was actually doing or something like that. And have you looked at this case? And
yeah, there's two of them. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Two of them against the Des Moines Register.
Okay, let's talk about that because we have newspaper people and we've been through this before. So give us context and then give us your opinion of these lawsuits.
I think Trump has only filed one, but there are two lawsuits.
Oh, okay.
And they're orchestrated. The second one's orchestrated to help Trump.
Okay.
But in the first one, I guess the Des Moines Register has a columnist who is pretty popular and does, polls with recognized valid methods. And she had predicted that Kamala Harris would win Iowa in the 2024 presidential election. And she predicted, yes, the poll was that Kamala Harris had a 3-point lead over Trump before the election was held. And as it turned out, Trump won the election by, I believe, 13 points in Iowa, won Iowa by 13 points. Well, so Trump sued the Des Moines Register and the columnist, whose name is Ann Seltzer, over the prediction of who would win the presidential election in Iowa. That's pretty stunning.
What was the basis of the suit? What was the claim of the suit for the?
The claim is also a dangerous claim. They sued under the Iowa Consumer Protection Act. It's actually called the Iowa Consumer Fraud Act, claiming that the poll was a deceptive trade practice and that it would be akin to a false advertisement. And that is the same theory that Republicans have used before. I believe the CBS suit uses that theory. CBS versus Trump uses that theory.
And so when you looked at that at the lawsuit, and you said there were two filed, one by Trump and one by someone else or some other party that appears to be, on behalf of Trump or assisting Trump. So what is your opinion of these lawsuits?
Again, if a computer were deciding the law, these would go nowhere. But because people are deciding the law and not computers, and I have lost my confidence in a great proportion of the judiciary, I don't know what to think about these lawsuits. I think, like I said, a computer decides this, and there's no way that Trump or anybody else can use the Consumer Protection Acts to claim that anybody was injured in a commercial way by the Des Moines Register predicting what the outcome would be between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of something that Justice Frankfurter, former U.S. Supreme Court Justice, said. And if I tell you exactly what he said, if I could open it, but I have it here.
Right.
But the cool thing about what he said is that, look, what the news organizations deal with are truth and perspective and understanding. Those are not potatoes. Those are not wares like potatoes that you buy and sell in the marketplace. They are the fabric of a self-governing society. And you cannot validly say that a law designed to protect your pocketbook in a commercial transaction can then be turned on the institutional press and said, "No, hey press, you didn't libel anybody. Nobody can sue you for libel, but you just did, you said Kamala Harris was going to win, and that was wrong. Trump won. Therefore, you've injured us as consumers." I mean, this is outrageous. It's outrageous. But that's what's going on.
And what happens is I'm thinking back to when we were sued, when the Youngstown Vindicator was publishing, and you were our lawyer, and we were sued, and and the lawsuit was filed. Like, for example, when I was named in several lawsuits, I'd sit down with the city editor and the other editors, and to discuss what we should do. And there was always this idea that, hey, if we can, we must fight this, because not only, throwing in the towel not only sort of suggests to the public that we have done something wrong, but it sets a precedent, and it emboldens those who want to go after news reporters and newspapers and even TV stations to continue to do that. So we saw that we had a sense of responsibility and duty to sort of protect freedom of the press. It seems to me now is that that's being diminished.
I agree. Well, for one thing, you've had the public being told by Fox News and by right-wing social media or right-wing websites. You've had the public being told you can't trust the press.
Yes.
They lie. Yeah. You can't trust the press, and you can't trust elections either, the people are told. Well, who does that leave? If you can't trust the press and you can't trust the outcome of elections, the only person you can trust is me, Donald J. Trump, the dictator. Right. You can trust me, and you can trust those who work for me, who work on my behalf. But you can't trust anything else, folks. And so when they don't trust the independent press, when they don't trust the elections, we've got a real self-governance problem, and we have that. That's not a coming problem. It's a current problem, and it's growing like a cancer, like a malignant melanoma on our country.
Yeah. Cindy, you wanted to say something, or should we go on to 60 Minutes? Because
it's frightening.
The third lawsuit. Go ahead, Cindy.
Yeah. You go on to 60 Minutes. I want Dave to, since you've looked at the ABC suit, I'd like to, and you said that you could see some of the validity of what went into ABC's decision to settle. I'd like you to review some of that, because I'm very curious about that.
Well, the reasons I said, they're afraid. We've got a Tampa, Florida jury in 2016 awarded $140 million to Hulk Hogan against Gawker, which, because of the difficulty of being able to appeal a judgment like that, because you have to post a bond, you have to post money to save that judgment. It's real hard. It's hard to appeal it. It's not because it's hard on the merits. It's because you have to post a whole bunch of money before you can validly appeal a judgment against you. Well, $140 million judgment against Gawker, what happened? It drove it into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Gawker was no more. And that's a Florida jury. Florida has been hostile to Disney under the Republican regime. You've got a Republican federal judge who was highly critical of George Stephanopoulos' use of the term rape to describe what everyone knows was in effect a rape.
Right.
And you have to be a little concerned.
Where was
in the end, the press is a business. In the end, it's a business.
Yeah.
And you can't. I remember when the Plain Dealer used to have like 350 journalists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now how many?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I remember when the Vindicator was a big thriving newspaper. Now where is it?
Yeah.
You can't. We used to always, when the newspapers were regional monopolies, in effect, that's what they were.
Yeah.
They had the money to stand up for principle.
Right.
It was rare in my career that we settled a libel case. We usually took it into the court system as far as we could take it, and we almost always won. Yeah, we settled once in a while, but it was pretty rare. It was very rare. But those days are over. Now you've got, even though Disney is a multi-billion-dollar company, ABC is only part of that.
Oh.
ABC is only part of that. And ABC still has to deal with this precedent. ABC gets into an expensive legal battle. Let's say a jury hits ABC for $30 million. Not that I think that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hypothetical and ridiculous. But the way things have been going in Florida, it's not out of the question.
Yeah.
Well, then what do you do?
Right.
You have to post a bond that's a percentage of that 30 million. It might even be the whole 30 million. You post a bond just as a condition for being able to appeal. Now, plus, I don't trust the judiciary anymore.
I know.
The judiciary isn't as respectful of precedent as it used to be. Now, who's causing that? Our current U.S. Supreme Court, which is attacking precedents wholesale.
Yeah.
Wholesale attacks on precedents that ideologically they disagree with.
Yeah.
They're just chucking precedents. They're just throwing them out. Yeah. I wouldn't want to be on that Supreme Court now and be in the minority. It must be just terribly frustrating. But see, I think we all have good reason to fear. Cases that used to be thrown out aren't necessarily being thrown out anymore.
And
why? Because they take their lead from the higher courts. And I found that my whole career. I can remember when Frank Celebrezzi was the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and before that, an Associate Justice for the higher Supreme Court. The lower courts kind of took the lead that we aren't going to like the press very much. We're not going to like the press. Then when Tom Moyer became the new Chief Justice and Andy Douglas and Craig Wright joined the Ohio Supreme Court, and they were very sensitive to First Amendment issues, and they were sensitive to the need to give the press certain leeway. Suddenly all the lower courts were good to the press too. I mean, that happens because the law has enough leeway in it, and the English language, which comprises the law, has enough leeway in it that you can make it go any way that seems appropriate to you. There is a wide amount of, a huge amount of discretion on how to interpret and apply the law. And any judge who says that's not true is disingenuous. It's plainly true.
And Donald Trump is very much aware that if any lawsuit gets to the Supreme Court, given the Republicans on that court, he's going to come out a winner. And I think he knows.
Well, he would be betting on that and expecting it. Exactly. And a lot of us would be too.
Right. So because it reminds, we're talking about the press and respect for the press. And I'm sure you're aware of this, David. Donald Trump has banned the Associated Press reporters from his events and press conferences because the wire service continues to refer to the Gulf of Mexico instead of Trump's designated Gulf of America. The AP is a major news source globally, and yet it is being stepped on, and its reporters are being stepped on as far as doing their job.
I just got a news alert from the New York Times. The Associated Press filed a lawsuit against White House officials over that issue. It must have just happened moments ago.
Wonderful.
Sometime today.
Yeah.
Good.
And oh my God, this, and this follows where the Pentagon, it's like a press cubicle. The people who cover the Pentagon have a floor designated for them where they work out of little cubicles so that they're there, quickly if they needed to be. When Trump won, they have replaced the legacy media types in the Pentagon
with Breitbart.
Exactly.
I know the non-legitimate news sources.
And now at the press briefings, the daily press briefings in the White House, a lot of attention's been given to internet, outlets and all of that. And the legacy media, you remember a time, and I'm old enough, and I don't know if Cindy's old enough to remember, and there was a time when during the press conferences, especially presidential press conferences, the first question would be asked by the Associated Press, and then the last question would be asked by Helen Thomas of United Press International. It was always like that.
Yeah.
Well, she was the senior person.
Exactly. Now they're totally ignored. All of these senior reporters are totally ignored by a young woman who has no respect for tradition, or the tradition of media. The way she talks to them.
You mean the new PR?
Yeah.
No, the press secretary. The press secretary. The 27-year-old press secretary.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
with no credentials at all.
Right. So let's talk about CBS and the lawsuit that Trump has filed against CBS. You've looked at it. What do you make of it? And
I believe that I don't want to say I believe, I know that the same theory that's being used against the Des Moines Register is what's being used against CBS. A consumer protection law is being touted as the basis for the suit against CBS. The consumer protection law is that you have deceived consumers by editing Kamala Harris's 60 Minutes interview and airing one clip in one of your shows, CBS, and a different clip answering the same question in another show, thereby deceiving the consumers under the consumer protection law. Now, let me give you and your viewers an idea of what consumer protection laws say. Here's what the Iowa one says, and I think we can trust that Texas is similar. There has to be a fraudulent and deceptive statement made in connection with an advertisement, sale, or lease of consumer merchandise, or the solicitation of contributions for charitable purposes. That's the law they're asserting is being violated by, in Iowa's case, a column that predicted the outcome of the presidential election in Iowa, and the same kind of law is being asserted against CBS, claiming that you falsely described how Kamala Harris answered a particular question because you played part of her answer in one program and a different part of her answer to the same question in a different program. I've read the transcript of that interview, which was released recently. Mm-hmm. It's a joke. There's nothing wrong there. I mean, there's nothing wrong there. Of course, anybody, especially in broadcasting, everything is timed. Right. 60 minutes only lasts 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Everything is timed. So yeah, you always take pieces of what people say because you have time constraints. Not only time constraints, but listeners impose their own time constraints. They get bored.
Right.
When I worked in broadcasting, and I did, we tried to keep every story at 30 seconds or less because we believed that our listeners didn't want to hear anything longer than that. So of course you're going to get snippets of an interview, pieces of an interview. You won't get the whole thing. It would be rare that you'd play the whole thing because they're usually long. The answers are long. Right. Look at my answers. Look how long they are.
But a lot of outlets are giving the whole interview afterwards on the internet, and
Yeah,
allow you
right.
to go and see it. But yeah, it seems
That's their
to me-
prerogative.
Right. Yeah.
CBS doesn't have to do that.
No.
It's not required to do that.
But it seems that they are making the case to move toward, or an effort to move toward, a state-run media, because they're trying to control the entire editorial process. So they want to determine what should get in and what shouldn't get in.
I do agree. They're trying to control what's being said about them publicly.
Yes.
What's being said about them publicly. They're trying to control it. And they're using intimidation tactics.
Absolutely.
They're using regulatory threats. Like, look what the FCC chair appointed by Trump has decided to look at PBS and NPR to see if they're running commercials, and thereby they should omit their tax-free status as nonprofit corporations.
Yeah.
Now, there may be legitimacy in looking at what PBS runs. I have to admit, when I look at PBS, they don't just say our underwriters are X. They also run a little short produced commercial for some of them.
Right.
And I could see saying, hey, don't do that anymore. But I cannot see we're gonna go after you to basically destroy you. We're going to destroy you because you've done that. Now, I don't even know if what they did was wrong, but I often raised an eyebrow because I'm a rabid PBS watcher.
Right.
My eyebrows have been raised. But the idea that we're going to try to destroy them, and why are we trying to destroy them? Their news is very even-handed. What's not even-handed are their shows. Their shows run liberal. Without question, their shows run liberal. So that's why we want to destroy them. That's why. And when I say their shows, I mean shows like 1A or Fresh Air or, Radio Lab. They run liberal. I have no problem with that because I'm pretty liberal. But I understand why the GOP hates them so much.
And the intimidation factor is very real right now because, with the pressure, financial pressure on the legacy media, newspapers and television, a lot of newsrooms are cutting back. They're reducing staff. They're reducing, bureaus, the number of people who work in bureaus, especially, in Washington, D.C. It's expensive to have a whole big staff in Washington, D.C. And then if you're a White House correspondent or a White House reporter and your editor is paying you a ton of money to live in Washington, D.C., and you're not permitted to attend a press conference, or when you go there, nobody answers your questions because you've been critical.
Right.
All of a sudden, your editors are calling up and saying, "What the hell are you doing over there?"
Yeah.
So reporters naturally are going to be careful how they report. And I know this from a fact because of Jim Trafficant. You remember Jim Trafficant?
Oh, sure.
He had 90% of the vote in this area, and everybody was afraid of him. And so but the Vindicator never supported him. So when he'd have press conferences, he either threw me out, which was okay because one of his staffers would actually tape the press conference and send me the tape, which he never knew. Or when I would stay in there, if I asked him a tough question, he'd simply ignore me, and there was no follow-up from the other reporters because they didn't want to anger him or they didn't want to, and this is exactly what's happening in Washington right now with Donald Trump.
I agree. And, you're in general, what I found about the institutional press is the institutional press does several things. And I'm talking about when it does news, not when it does columns or editorials. It provides information that raise questions more than publishing a definitive truth. Usually what they do is provide reliable information that raises questions about whether your government is operating as it should.
Yeah.
The other thing the institutional press did was, if it had a mantra at all or an agenda at all, the agenda was meritocracy in the public interest.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was an agenda, it was, well, government should be acting in the public interest and as a meritocracy. And to the extent that the press would publicize things that were controversial, that publicity usually was information that raised questions about whether the meritocracy was happening, whether the government was dodging the merits and doing something for improper purposes or purposes that were not genuinely in the public interest. The That's being self-eroded, if not, it's not being self-eroded out of the desire of the press to stop doing that. They're being intimidated. I mean, imagine you've got, when the president is using regulators to punish or threaten to punish the business that is the lifeblood of the journalism, people are going to stand up, people in the journalism community are going to be afraid. It would be hard. It would be hard to stay stalwart over time. It would be hard to do it.
Yes.
And then what's being published are puff pieces, information that is not really serving the public interest, information that does not promote a meritocracy or genuine self-governance in our country. I think we've already, I think that all the pins are in place to remove the value of what's been the societal value of the press. Replace it with propaganda.
And what happens to a country when this occurs?
Well, that's how self-governance dies. Yeah. That's how democracy dies. And it didn't just happen in Nazi Germany or fascist Italy. It's happened in Venezuela. It's happened in Peru. It's happened all over the world in different countries, and it's happening here.
Yeah. Which is shocking.
Oh, I can't believe that this has happened so fast and so many people support it.
Yeah.
They deserve what they get. But the trouble is what they deserve, we also get. Those of us who don't deserve.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well,
go ahead, Seth.
I'm going to be going overseas in a few months, and I'm actually nervous about going there as an American because we have lost so much standing among other countries.
Are you going to Europe?
Yeah.
Yeah, we betrayed Europe. We betrayed Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, what do dictators do? They punish those who publicly criticize them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They because they want to gain control over what's being said publicly about them. They raise doubts about the legitimacy of elections that they don't win.
Right.
And what is the Republican Party and Donald Trump? What have they been doing?
Exactly.
Those very things.
And so, you know what? It's ironic because as I've been reading the stories about the defunding of USAID, I grew up in East Africa, in Uganda, where
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I grew up in. My mother was born then. I was born in Uganda as well. Until we got
He's African. You didn't know that?
Until we got
the home of Idi Amin.
He kicked us all out, and so for a long time, I was in America as a stateless person because I didn't have a country, and so. But when I started working for the English newspaper as an apprentice after high school, and what USAID used to do, apart from building libraries and going out into the villages and helping with development and all of that, and bringing young Americans, idealistic Americans to come and work in the third world, they used to fund a program where African journalists were sent to the United States to learn American journalism, to learn about freedom of the press, to learn about how newspapers and television stations operate.
And that the institutional press was skeptical of government, skeptical of authority, not immediately accepting of it. Right.
Right. And so this was, and so when Idi Amin, just before Idi Amin took over, they had, of course, after independence, they had the African governments. For the English newspaper I worked for, it was owned by a chain out of London. I was in the proofreading department and the editorial department. Well, they're all Brits. And so one day I walk in and there's a guy, an African, at the desk, and he had these pens on his desk, and that was it. And I'd never seen him before. So I asked my boss, I said, "What's going on? Who's that guy?" And he says, "Oh, that's the government censor." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "The government has now decided they are going to place a censor in the newsroom so that every political story that's written, before it is typeset, will go to him, and he'll determine what should be kept in the story and what shouldn't." And that is what happened to Congress. And I'm thinking about what's happening here, and I'm thinking, perhaps it's not as dramatic as having censors in newsrooms, but the effect is the same.
It's self-censorship.
Dampening of freedom of the press.
Yeah.
I agree. And they almost don't need a censor in the newsroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I do believe that the institutional press is trying mightily to sustain its independence and to sustain its skepticism of government and to sustain those things. But they seem to be like surfers going up against a tsunami.
Yeah.
It looks like it's just too much. And I'll tell you, I have another observation too about the institutional press, or about the press generally. I've come to form the opinion that you have a better chance of trusting what's in the press when what you're reading is gathered firsthand by the writer or the writer's agents, the writer's, by the organization's employees or contractors, especially employees. Breitbart doesn't gather news.
Right.
Fox doesn't have a giant news organization. No, they don't. Let's be candid. The news originators is where the best chance you have of getting reliable information is where the information you're reading about was gathered by the writer or someone at the writer's behest. When all they do is pick snippets of information they read from somewhere else,
Right.
and then blow it out of proportion or comment about it in some bombastic way, you're not getting news.
Nope.
You're getting propaganda.
And that's exactly what happens on social media.
Oh, that's what social media is all about, and the stupid American public doesn't get it.
I know.
Right.
I know.
And what's also disturbing, and we've talked about this, is the public's attitude towards newspapers and TV stations, a legacy press. There was a time when we'd get sued, and I'd get people, even public officials, calling me in support, saying, don't let that SOB get away with this lawsuit against you, keep fighting, and because they trusted us. You're not hearing that kind of support anymore. It's almost muted because even the public has reached the point where they're thinking, we're just tired of this. If we speak out, we'll also be targeted.
Yeah.
So there's this general attitude that, don't speak out or you're going to be targeted.
Yeah. Well, look what happened to the election workers in, where was it? Georgia?
Yeah.
Sure.
Their lives were destroyed, so anybody who thinks about speaking up against them, that's what they're going to be facing.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you like, this is probably not for your show, but
okay.
The idea that Amy Acton is running for governor, she's going to be eaten for lunch, breakfast, dinner, and dessert. She cannot sustain. She does not have the personality to sustain what these thugs are going to throw against her. She couldn't sustain it the first time when she was just the health director.
Yeah, I wondered about that, but maybe having had that experience, she thinks that she can. I don't know.
But remember why she stepped down.
Because it was the death threats, wasn't it?
There were threats to her family. There were threats to people who were trading outside her home. And guess who the presumed Republican nominee is going to be? Vivek Ramaswamy, who is cut from the same cloth as Donald Trump.
Right.
It's going to be an all-out war against Democrats in the general election. And you're right, David. I don't know if Amy Acton, who is highly qualified, has worked in government, was indeed the darling of the Republican Party at the beginning, or at least Mike DeWine.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's going to be able to withstand the kind of attacks that are going to be coming.
I don't think she's fit for that. She seems too kind to be able to sustain that stuff. Right. I'll tell you, I find nothing but contradiction in the GOP, nothing but hypocrisy in the GOP, nothing but values I detest in the GOP. And I think they're going to they are ruining the United States.
Yeah. David, I wanted to ask you something. And Bertram, I don't know if you're going to want to leave this in the show either, but there's some videos going around about dark MAGA and these tech oligarchs from California and this plan that they have to destroy democracy, not just in this country, but worldwide, and replace it with these internet city-states. And this one blogger, she's a podcaster, actually, Politics Girl, says that it's already occurring in 3 countries, including Honduras. I can't remember the other 2, that they've already set up these things. Have you heard anything about this? Do you know anything about this? And whether or not it would, I mean, it's frightening to me whether, even considering that it might succeed, because and it goes along with Project 2025, it's going right along with that. But she says that this has already, and she's a Brit, she says it's already occurring in several other countries, and that's why Vance is in the White House. That's why they put him there. And that's what they are moving toward, these tech guys. Peter Thiel, Musk, Vance, Curtis Yarwin, they all believe in dictators. And Yarwin has been saying what the United States needs is a CEO, and that a CEO of a country is a dictator, that there's no difference. So that's what, according to her and some others on who podcast these things, that's what their ultimate plan is.
Yeah, I sort of, I don't know. I mean, right now we don't, Donald Trump and Musk are running the country. They are running Congress, as evidenced by the nominees who have been confirmed. They're running the courts, and I don't know, where we go from here.
They're not fully running the courts, but they're trying to.
Yeah.
Biden appointed a lot of federal judges.
Right.
And so did Trump. And I think that it's up to the judges right now, I think, to save the country.
Right.
The judges and the institutional press.
Yeah.
Now, I should add to that, where are our leaders? I can't understand why Kamala Harris is not front and center using her prosecutorial skills. Yes. I think she's a fine orator.
Yes.
Where is she?
Yeah.
Michelle Obama cared enough that she didn't attend the inauguration. Where is she?
Yeah.
Where's her husband?
Right.
Where is Hillary Clinton, who got the popular vote in 2016? Where is she? Where are and that guy, George W. Bush, he says nothing.
I know.
Where is he? The Cheneys. Yeah. I have great respect for the Cheneys for coming out and saying, we're going with Kamala Harris. We're against Trump. I thought Elizabeth Cheney was a real heroine. Where are these people now?
A friend of mine who's a Democrat said that to me the other day, that she can't understand why there was not one recount after the election. There wasn't one mention of contesting anything or checking anything. She's concerned about Elon Musk and his Starlight satellite, whatever he runs. But she says they're nowhere to be found. It's just been total, radio silence since the election.
Right. It's like abdication.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
What happened to our leaders? I want to see some leaders to get up there and speak regularly on the soapbox against what's happening to our country. It's going to be gone. We're almost there.
Yeah.
And to that point, David, I don't know if you watched or Cindy saw Jon Stewart, who had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on. The two of them are doing exactly what you were saying, David, the leaders should be doing.
Yeah.
They did. I mean, it was a brilliant show. They did a.
I wish I'd have seen it.
It's still on. I mean, you can.
He does a podcast. You can hear it.
It just was, and I'm looking at those two people and saying that's exactly what the country needs.
Well, Bernie Sanders.
The trouble with AOC though is that she's been so vilified.
Yeah.
She's turned into, they turned her into a cartoon character to hate.
Yeah.
They tried to do the same thing with Pelosi.
Right.
But I thought Pelosi overcame that and showed that she was a real patriot and a real leader.
Yeah. It was horrific what they did to her. Bernie Sanders is on YouTube, and he's been commenting in some shorts about what's been going on. He's doing what he can, but I don't hear from anybody else.
Right. Especially you'd think people who ran for president and didn't get trounced.
Yeah.
Or people who were the president, you'd think they'd be out there trying to save the republic. They're not doing anything that I know of.
Yeah, I know.
Where are they? Like the guy who's the senator of Arizona, Mark Kelly, former naval officer, former astronaut. Yeah. Well, I'm living in Arizona. I think I'm going to write him a letter and say, get out there.
Yeah.
Get out there and condemn this stuff.
Right.
And get out there regularly and condemn it.
Yeah.
Get some of your friends to do it. I think Kelly could be a leader for us.
Yeah, I like him. And neither one of the Obamas have been anywhere.
Yeah, what are they
I've heard.
doing?
The Obamas are missing. The Clintons are missing.
Right.
George Bush, I don't know. George Bush's daughter says more than he does.
Yeah. Well, listen, David, I appreciate it. Thanks again for the time. This was really wonderful. We'll post it as soon as my producer in Turkey has looked at it and done whatever, and I'll send you a link. But we'll be in touch.
Please do.
We've got other things to talk about, and as this thing progresses,
and as the country disintegrates, we'll be back in touch.
Yeah, like the question is, will we have this country as a self-governing republic by this time next year?
Yeah, right.
My prediction is we will not.
Oh, God.
It'll be gone. And, I'm so concerned. I'm like constructively, in employment law, if the employer does mean things to you that are not illegal, but basically causes you to resign, you can sue for constructive discharge. Constructive meaning you were in effect fired by virtue of the way you were treated.
Right.
And to give you an example, at KQV Radio, where I worked in Pittsburgh, which was all news, we had a guy on staff who management really didn't like, and he had been there forever. He'd been there for 20 years or so, but they didn't like him, and he was active in the union, AFTRA. And so they wanted to get rid of him, but they knew that if they fired him, there'd be a problem, a legal problem. So how did they get rid of him? They put him, after 25 years of news reporting, he principally covered city affairs and the police, they put him on the all-night shift.
Okay.
And he eventually left. That's
Right.
what they wanted. It was a constructive discharge. Well, I've been looking at how do I get to Great Britain? How do I get to Costa Rica? How do I get to New Zealand? How do I get to Canada?
Right.
Can I go to Portugal? Where can I go? Not because I want to go live in those places. I don't.
Right.
But I'm being constructively discharged from my country.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this isn't for the program either, Bertram, but I just wanted to tell you along those lines, David. I was visiting my niece recently, and she was telling me that she was updating the passports for her daughter, and her husband, and how much it was going to cost because the cost had gone up and there was some extra things she had to do. And I said, "Oh, are you planning to go somewhere?" And she says, "No, I'm just trying to get ready in case we have to leave in an emergency."
I did the same thing. I got my passport updated in case we have to leave.
I know.
Well,
Hey, I have to tell you, can I tell you this?
Please.
I would recommend this to you highly.
Okay.
When Trump took over the first time and he issued his executive orders restricting immigration from countries that were principally Muslim countries,
Yes.
I was really alarmed.
Yeah.
So I went to Syracuse undergrad, Syracuse University.
Right.
And I took a course my final year called The History of Modern Germany. And so I tried to find that professor, and I found him. He's retired, but he's still, with it.
Right.
And I said, I had you in 1972. I'm really worried about what's going on. Can you recommend some books to me so that I could understand how professionals or well-educated Germans who didn't leave the Third Reich, who stayed in Germany, how they lived with themselves, how they couldn't have all been in favor of their government.
Right. Yeah.
And he, first of all, he said he couldn't believe what was going on in our country in 2017. He couldn't believe it.
Right.
He said, I never thought this would happen in our country. That was in 2017. But then he recommended some books, and I'll recommend one to you. This book is terrific. It's by Sebastian Haffner. It was written in 1937. It's a memoir. It's called Defying Hitler, but he doesn't defy Hitler in the book. He doesn't do that. But what's really good about it, it's pretty contemporaneous. When he gets to the years 1933, 1934, 35, especially 33 and 34, man, it's riveting. He was trained to be a lawyer. He was just a young lawyer at the time. He was training to be assigned to be an administrative judge. And he tells about what it was like when the Third Reich, when the Nazis took over. And he was against the Nazis, but in effect, he said, look, everybody, this is in effect. He was saying, look, we all had jobs. We had to do our jobs. We had to earn a living. We're not going to get out there during the day and, resist the brown shirts. Our resistance was small. We had survival. We had everyday life to live. And, we had to pay the mortgage. We had to buy groceries. We had to do all those things. And he's not saying that apologetically. He's just saying Nothing changed. He said, basically, we all went to work before Hitler came to power. We all went to work after he came to power. But he talks about what the transition was like. And boy, I really recommend reading it. It's not a long read, but it's superb.
And I was watching the movie Munich, The Edge of War. And this was, of course, when Hitler was sort of expansion, thinking about expansion. And there's a scene in that movie where the person who's playing Hitler is talking to one of his aides, and Hitler had decided to do something that his inner circle were concerned about. And so this aide goes to Hitler and says, if you do this, the people are going to be upset. And Hitler's answer was, the people who support me are children. They'll do whatever I tell them to do. And that's
what Donald Trump said.
That's exactly Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And it was so striking when I watched that scene. I'm thinking, oh my God.
Yes. Oh my God.
This is it. I mean, you can't think for yourself. You don't want to think for yourself. So you're led blindly. And you allowed yourself to be led blindly. And it's really troubling, especially for those of us who came from a dictatorship and know what happens.
Yeah, there's a guy in Cleveland who gardens a lot with my partner, who's Tina. And he moved here from Bangladesh.
Okay.
And he's seen, the authoritarian government. And he said it's real. He's lived in different countries, but he's a native of Bangladesh. And he said, what's happening, this was prior to November, but over the summer, he said, what's happening here, I've seen this before.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't kid yourself. You're going down the same path that Bangladesh went down and whatever other countries he's lived in went down. Yeah. It's all done the same way. They follow the same formula.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening here. And he said, I can't believe that the American people would even consider voting for this guy.
Right.
I know. Well, that's what our Turkish producer said, exactly the same thing, that she said it's following the same path as they went down in Turkey.
Yeah, I believe it. And I'll bet Hungary went down the same path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And look what's happening in Germany, where the alt-right is expected to make gains in the election. And of course, J.D. Vance goes and meets with the head of the alt-right, but refuses to meet with the chancellor of Germany. And one of the things that the alt-right is talking about is immigration, which is a big issue there. It's like in Europe, all over Europe, as it is here. But one of the things that they are talking about is not only going after illegal immigrants, but legal immigrants who came to this country and got naturalized. Donald Trump has also said that. He says, not only are we going to look at illegal immigration, we're going to look at legal immigrants and look at.
I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. I didn't know.
I'm not either. And so somebody asked the question: does that mean you're going to look at at your wife, Melania, who came here on a visitor's visa, illegally, and then ended up getting a visa that is reserved for highly trained, highly educated, highly qualified individuals like rocket scientists.
Geniuses, yeah.
She got one of those visas. So.
And then she.
Go Melania.
Yeah.
Brainy. Who would have thought? Brainy Melania.
That's it. Well, David, we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Okay. Great pleasure.
Good to see you, Dave.
Bye, Cindy. Bye.
Bye-bye.